Hey guys, I'm back with part two to the vampire stuff. So what I usually do, just to kind of like let you guys know, what I usually do is I'll keep the video open on my end so I can see myself, but more specifically so that I can watch the timer, which is why I don't typically look directly at the camera. And the other thing is I'm reading cards off of another tab that I have pulled up. So I noticed that the timer on the last video went almost twice as long as what I try to keep my videos at. So I went ahead and stopped it, and I'm in the process of uploading that video, and now we're going to jump back into the deck list while it's uploading. And pick up from where we left off, which I believe was Viscera Seer, and try and finish out the deck list and go over some of the stuff. So anytime I do like a deck list like this where somebody like wants to know my opinion, and like I actually go through the process where I make a deck list, I will also post that deck list on one of the online sites. I think the one I use is Archidect, which is really quickly becoming popular. But I use that, and I'll try to, in some way, either in a comment or in the description or something, post a link to the deck list that I'm talking to you guys about in either a comment or the description box or something, so that you guys can go see and look at the list that I have. If you want to build a deck based off the list I have, you can. If you want to make changes, obviously you can just, when you make your own list, if you want to use mine as like a referencing point and then build from there, you can totally do that. But yeah, we're going to jump back into it. So I last left off at Viscera Seer. It's 1 black for a 1/1. It's a vampire wizard. You can while it's in play, you can sacrifice a creature to scry 1. So the scry mechanic is whatever the scry number is, that's how many cards you can look at and decide whether you want to keep those cards on top in any order or put them on the bottom of your deck in any order. Most cards that scry are going to scry 1. There are some that do scry 2. There aren't quite as many that do scry 2, but there are some. And there are a few. When I say a few, I think there's probably no more than 5, I would say. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm going to guesstimate 5 or fewer cards in the game of Magic that currently scry 3 or more. And I do say scry 3 or more, and the reason I say that is I think there's 1 or 2 cards that they have X in their cost, and whenever you cast them, if they resolve, you get to scry X and then do something. So, like, I want to say off the top of my head, without digging into it too much, there's 5 or fewer cards in the game of Magic the Gathering right now that will scry for 3 or more. Most of them are going to say scry 1, like, I don't know, like 90% of them are going to say scry 1. Your other 10% is split. I would say 7% of that is split among scry 2, and then the remaining 3% are the 5 or fewer cards that I believe that scry 3 or more. But the reason this is relevant is because now you can use Viscera Seer to sacrifice those extra creature tokens that maybe you don't need or are going to die anyway, and try and filter your deck for something that you need. Viscera Seer is also a sacrifice outlet, just as Yahenni is a sacrifice outlet. There are a couple of things in here. There are tons of things in here that care about creatures in general dying, so you having sacrifice outlets to get rid of your excess creatures or your creature tokens that probably aren't going to stick around anyway is highly relevant. On top of that, there's a creature in here somewhere, I think it's a little further down the list, that cares about when you lose a creature, everybody else has to lose a creature or something like that. So Viscera Seer is just another cheap sacrifice. It's a 1 mana 1/1 sacrifice outlet that will help you filter your deck. So that's pretty good. Patron of the Vein is the next card in the list. It's 4 generic black for a 4/4 vampire shaman. It has flying. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. That's good. 6 mana 4/4 that flies, that comes in and kills a creature an opponent controls, is good. Also says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it and put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. So good Good ability. Bad. What I would say is bad wording. So the wording is that whenever a creature an opponent control dies, exile it and put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. So the reason that wording is relevant is because it doesn't say instead exile it and then you get to put a 1/1 counter. So the creature card has to legitimately go to their graveyard from the battlefield in order for Patron of the Veins ability to get the 1/1 counter and give your guys, all that fun stuff, to actually work. The creature has to go from the battlefield to the graveyard. Then the Patron's ability will trigger and exile it from the graveyard and give all your guys a +1/+1 counter. The reason it's a great ability on a 6-mana 4/4 that kills something when it comes into play that also flies. But the reason it's not as great is because it doesn't say exile it instead. And the reason that's relevant is because if another opponent has something in play that says if a creature an opponent controls dies, you exile it instead, or if it would die, you exile it instead, your Patron's never going to see the death trigger. Most likely your Patron's never going to see the death trigger. I would say, AP and AP rulings, which is active player, non-active player kind of deal. If you're the active player, you're definitely never going to see it kind of deal. But the other factor is it says if it dies, do this. The other thing says if it would die instead, so it's a replacement effect. I'll have to dig into the specific rulings on this, but I believe regardless of your turn order cycle, I believe that the exile instead being a replacement effect is going to supersede your Patron of the Veins ability. Again, I'm not 100% positive, so I will look into that in the future, but that's how I believe it would work. So if there is an effect like that in play, the Patron's last ability is not going to be that relevant. In my personal opinion, it's just not. But otherwise, if that's not in play, it's super good. Anowon, the Ruin Sage, Anowon. It's 3 generic black for a 4/3 legendary creature vampire shaman. Wow, that's okay. I feel like this tribe has more shamans in it than any other tribe, which is kind of funny, but okay. It has an ability that states at the beginning of your upkeep, each player sacrifices a non-vampire creature. Now, I'm a coin flip on this card. So I like the fact that it says each opponent sacrifices a non-vampire creature, meaning if they're playing a deck that's predominantly not vampires, they have to give one of those up, but they only have to give it up during your upkeep. It does say each player, so it will affect you too, but you are vampire tribal, so there's not a single creature in this list that isn't in some way a vampire in one form or another. The Throne has an ability that states as it enters, you choose a creature type, and then it becomes that creature type in addition to any other types it has. So while it's in play, it's going to be a vampire. While it's not in play, it's just a golem. But Anowon's ability only takes effect while he's in play, and it only cares about the creatures in play. So the big thing is it affects all players, including yourself. You're playing tribal. You don't have to worry about sacrificing non-vampire creatures. You're not playing any. But where the coin flip on this creature is it's a 5-mana 4/3, so it's 3 toughness, which we discussed in the video where I talked about dealing with Dredge and playing Marilyn the Morn Song. 3 toughness creatures, really not that strong in Commander. Just my personal opinion on that, but based on some of the things I've seen as far as creatures are concerned, some of the things I've seen as far as black-based board wipes, and red-based board wipes for that matter, and some of your blue bounce effects. Some of your blue bounce effects are, base it on something that you have in play versus the opposing creature's toughness. Again, 3's not that high of a number. 3 not being that high of a number, red, black, and blue are all going to have relevant effects that either deal the damage, bounce the creature, or just give it -3 toughness, which are all really low numbers, really relevant abilities. So 3 toughness is not that great. On the same side with the 3 toughness not being that great, the ability only triggers during your upkeep, not during each player's upkeep. Now, it does say each player does this. I would prefer it say, during that player's upkeep, they sacrifice a non-vampire. But, that's the trade-off. It says each player instead of during that player's upkeep. But it has to live to your turn. It has to live to your upkeep for the ability to go off. Now, again, as we discussed, it is a triggered ability, so the Throne card that we discussed earlier in video 1, or in part 1, is going to give you an extra trigger, so it's going to make everybody sacrifice 2. But again, it has to live to your upkeep, and 3 toughness is just... 3 toughness says, I'm good, but I can be better. 4 toughness is like, yeah, I'm on your decent level. 4 toughness is relevant. And the reason I say 4 toughness is relevant versus 3 toughness is relevant is because there's a lot of relevant creatures that are commanders that have 3 power. That could easily trade with any creature that has toughness 3 or less. If not, come out on the better end. I've seen there are actually quite a few commanders that have 3 power and 4 toughness. And they're only like 3 or 4 mana. So like their power toughness ratio is, I trade with Anawan. Most other creatures I'm going to come out positive on. Some of the heavier hitters I'm probably not going to be able to take down, but the heavier hitters cost more mana. So, for 5 mana instead of an Anawan, you could play Sir Conrad. Granted, Sir Conrad's not in my list because this list has a sub-reanimation theme, not a mass reanimation theme, so Sir Conrad's not as strong in this list as it could be in something else. But Sir Conrad, for the same price as what you would pay for Anawan the Ruin Sage, Sir Conrad costs you the same price, and it's a 5/4 instead of a 4/3, with other relevant abilities, that are just as relevant as Anawan's abilities. With the difference of Anawan has to live to your turn for its ability to do something. Sir Conrad's ability, he has a static ability that works on everybody's turn, and then he has an activate ability that as long as you have the mana, you can activate it whenever you want. So, as you guys can see, trade-off there, Anawan versus Sir Conrad. I'm pretty sure they're both vampires. As you can see, one is better in the power toughness versus cost range, and one is slightly better in the ability range. So and one is the one that I was on the fence about putting in. I like the ability, but it's not. I don't know. I'd rather have another. I think for 5 mana, I'd rather have another reanimation style effect, or another board wipe effect, or another protection spell of some kind, personally. But again, this list was intended to be wallet friendly. If you go to the list that I post on Archidekt, it'll tell you roughly how much it's going to cost. I took a quick glance. That number is a little more expensive than what I was trying to shoot for, by about $300. But again, you can change out some of the mana base. You probably don't need your regular fetches. You could probably take out some of the more expensive lands like the Triome, and the Shocks and the new Surveils, and put in bad versions that are more cost effective in the early on. If you're building the deck over time, that's actually what I recommend, is that you start by playing, your cheapest of the cheap stuff, save your money, buy the individual cards, and gradually upgrade the deck. Again, your fetch lands and Edgar, here's the other thing. Edgar Markov himself is about, depending on the version you get, I want to say roughly 1/5 of the cost of the deck. So at $500, or it's actually like 580 something, I think. So 1/5 of 580 something's like $120 something. So the Edgar Markov is roughly 1/5 of the price of the deck. So if you wanted to play a different commander, you could. Edgar Markov gives you your best longevity for the deck. But I digress. Like, again, I'm going to leave a link to the deck list so that you guys can check it out. You know, if you want to make changes, copy paste onto Notepad, and then on your Notepad version, make the changes you want to make, whatever the case is. Next card is Twilight Prophet. A good card. I feel like this card should probably be played in any deck that plays black. Even though it's a good vampire, but I feel like it's just good in any deck that plays black just because of what it does. So it's 2 generic and a black. So it's 2 generic black for a vampire cleric that is a 2/4. So 4 toughness, good. Has flying, so has evasion, doing good on that ability. Has Ascend, the old Ascend mechanic from the original Ixalan time frame, which is if you have 10 or more permanents in play, you get the City's Blessing. City's Blessing by itself doesn't do anything. However, Twilight Prophet has an ability that says if you have the City's Blessing at the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal the top card of your library, and each opponent loses an amount of life equal to that card's converted mana cost, and you add that card to your hand. And then you also gain life where X is equal to that card's converted mana cost. So once you have the Twilight Prophet in play and you have the Ascend, you have the City's Blessing, during your upkeep, you're going to flip the top card of your library, and whatever its mana cost is, or mana value as the card states, let's say the total is 3. Let's say it's like 1 black-white. So the total is 3. Each opponent's going to lose 3, and you're going to gain 3. But, if the total's more, like 5, each opponent's going to lose 5, you're going to gain 5. And then you get to add that card to your hand. So it's giving you more semi-card draw capability. But on top of that, it's also slowly draining your opponents, as well as allowing you to gain life to kind of like stay in the game a little bit longer. And it's got evasion, and it's a 2/4, and it's only 4 mana. And then that's the other thing. In the Edgar Markov list, whenever you cast it, you get an extra creature token. So assuming you're using 4 lands to play this creature, you've got 4 lands there. This creature, if it hits, you get the token when you cast it. So that's 6 out of your 10 permanents. And the Ascend mechanic is permanents, not non-land permanents. So lands count too. So if it's like late in the game and you've got 10 lands in play and you cast this, as soon as it hits, you've got the City's Blessing. I think it's the only card in this deck that cares about City's Blessing. But its ability is relevant once you have the City's Blessing. It's also a good cheap vampire. It's 4 mana for a 2/4. It has evasion. It's just good as far as the creature's concerned. The next creature is, you see this creature a ton in decks that play black, in decks that are vampire themed. It's Vampire Night Hawk. 1 black. It's 1 generic it's a 1 generic black creature that is a 2/3, 3 toughness for 3 mana. But it has 3 keyword abilities: flying, death touch, and lifelink. So it has evasion. It's going to kill whatever it deals damage to, and you're going to gain life in the process. So just all around a good vampire for 3 mana, 3 relevant keywords, and it's probably going to kill things and gain you life. So the next one is one that I don't see a lot of play in my play groups of this card. But that doesn't mean that, those of you that are listening and watching and hopefully subscribing don't necessarily see this more often than me. And that is Drana and Linvala. It's one generic white, white, black for a vampire angel that is a 3/4 for 4 mana. Has flying and vigilance. So 2 types of evasion. Flying, so you can only be blocked by flyers or creatures with reach. And vigilance, so attacking doesn't cause it to tap. So you can use it to attack and defend. States, activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. So the reason I find this problematic is because in another video I did, I talked about Linvala, Keeper of Silence. She turns off all activated abilities of creatures your opponents control. This one does the same thing, but with an extra twist, because it is drawn. It's one of those team-up cards from, I think, the Aftermath set. So the extra ability is Drana and Linvala has all activated abilities of all creatures your opponents control. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate those abilities. So now, not only do you turn off all your opponent's creatures' activated abilities, you also have all of those activated abilities from those creatures, and you can spend mana of any type to activate those abilities. So that's kind of relevant because, what is it? It's the king from Eldraine. The first time we were in Eldraine, it was the Buy a Box promo. Can't remember the full name off the top of my library, but has 5 activated abilities. All of those activated abilities require a color and or a color plus generic. So with Drana and he also costs 5 mana. That creature is a legendary creature that costs 5 mana, 4 generic and a white. But he states, if he's in play and you have a Drana and Linvala, your Drana and Linvala turns off his ability to activate any of his abilities and has all of his activated abilities, and you can spend mana of any type to activate those. Well, one of those abilities requires a red mana, and it gives all creatures haste and trample. Well, now you could just be like, I'll just pay a white mana and use it as the red mana activation. One of those abilities requires blue mana, and it lets you draw a card. Well, I don't run blue, but I can use red, black, or white mana to use that ability. One of the other abilities is green and puts +1/+1 counters on things. Again, if you have Drana and Linvala, like, you don't need green mana to activate that ability. You can spend the mana that you have and use it as if it were green. So not only does a 4 mana 3/4 take away your opponent's activated abilities of creatures they control, it also has those activated abilities, and on top of that can spend mana of any type to use those activated abilities. So, there's a green creature that says you can pay a green and tap it and add X mana of any color combination to your mana pool, where X is equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Well, now you can pay 1 of anything and do that with Drana and Linvala. And you prevent them from using that creature to be able to do things. So it's... Drana and Linvala is better than Linvala, Keeper of Silence, but also probably more targeted than the Linvala, Keeper of Silence. Also, Linvala, Keeper of Silence is only an angel. Drana and Linvala is the team-up card from the Aftermath stuff, which is Drana and Linvala. So it's a vampire and an angel, so it fits your vampire theme. Creeping Bloodsucker, it's a 1 generic and a black for a 1/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, Creeping Bloodsucker deals 1 damage to each opponent. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. So... Again, it has to happen during your upkeep, but it's a 2 mana 1/2. It's also a triggered ability, so the Throne card that we talked about in Vampires Part 1 will trigger this ability an additional time if they're both in play. Also, it's a damage-based ability, so that's most of the effects that we've discussed in this deck list so far are effects that care about your opponent's losing life, or effects that cause your opponents to lose life. So like the reason this ability is an ability that might matter a little bit more is because there are card effects out there that say you can't take non-combat damage. Well, this is a form of non-combat damage. So those effects might stop it. But it's also damage. And this list is also in a color that has card effects that like to increase damage output. You could be playing one of the enchantments that say if a source you control would deal damage, it deals double damage or it deals triple damage or whatever the value is. So if you play those, if you play one that doubles, well, your activation is going to deal 2 damage to each opponent and you're going to gain 6. Well, if you have the throne, each opponent's going to take 2 twice over and you're going to gain 6 twice over. If you have one of the damage triplers, it's 1 becomes 3 and you gain 9. With the throne, you'll double that. But like if you have a damage doubler and a damage tripler, 1 becomes 3 becomes 6, or 1 becomes 2 becomes 6. And then each opponent takes 6 and you gain 18 and you do that twice over. So there are things that you could play that work with this creature that increase the damage it deals. Notably, again, damage does cause loss of life. So things that care about, there was something that we talked about in video 1 that said during your turn, if an opponent would lose life, they lose twice that much life. And it states in the reminder text that damage causes loss of life. So like this guy's going to shoot everybody for 1 and you're going to gain 1 or 3, depending on how you're going to gain a number equal to the number of opponents you have. But then because the damage causes loss of life, the other thing that cares about, like, oh, you lost a life, you're going to lose another. You're going to deal, if you have 3 opponents, you're going to deal 1 damage to each opponent, gain 3 life. And because the damage causes loss of life, each opponent's going to lose another life flat out. So that's, that's all relevant. And again, with the throne, you're gonna double the creeping bloodsuckers trigger. Here's the creature I was talking about towards the end of part 1. It's Butcher of Malakir. If you've been playing for a while, you know what this creature is. You know what it does. It's a vampire warrior, 5 generic, black for a 5/4. Has flying. Whenever Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So this one comes in handy with your sacrifice outlets like Yahenni and Viscera Seer. And things, things in play that care about things dying. So, in tandem, also his ability is a triggered ability. So if you have Throne in play, it'll double this trigger. So let's say you have Viscera Seer in play. And your opponents have more creatures than you. And you're like, cool, I have this Throne, Viscera Seer, and a token in play. Well, now you can sack your token with the Viscera Seer's ability to scry 1, so you're going to filter your deck a little bit. Butcher of Malakir is going to say, cool, trigger, each opponent sacrifices a creature. The Throne creature is going to trigger and say, oh, you were a vampire and you had a triggered ability, you're going to get an additional trigger. So now each opponent's going to sacrifice 2 creatures for your 1 creature. Which is relevant because if you're not doing the best on the creature basis, you're slowly whittling down those board states. And it does force them to sacrifice, so it's going to get around things that, like if their entire board is hexproof for some reason, cool, well, I'm not targeting your, the ability isn't affecting your board, it's affecting you, the player. So it's going to get around hexproof, it's going to get around indestructible. Things that are indestructible can still technically be sacrificed. So it's going to get around that. It also gets around the players having hexproof or shroud or whatever the mechanic is that they're using, because it says each opponent, it doesn't say target opponent. So that's also relevant, for the players playing Leyline of Sanctity and stuff, and they're like, I have hexproof. It's like, Butcher doesn't care. So he's a good relevant creature to have in play. Another reason he's relevant is if your opponents are playing one-sided board wipes like Ruinous Ultimatum and In Garrick's Wake and Plague Wind and effects like that that say destroy all creatures that aren't yours, essentially. Well, if you have a Butcher of Malakir in play and you have all these creatures that are now going to die, Butcher of Malakir is like, oh, these things are going to die, they're going to die, I'm going to put all these triggers on the stack. Even though the player that cast the spell that had it resolved doesn't lose any creatures from the spell, the Butcher's ability might force them to sacrifice their entire board. So the board wipe is a true all-around board wipe. So Butcher kind of has that extra security blanket of, if you're playing a one-sided, if an opponent is playing a one-sided board wipe, they're also probably going to get board wiped in the process, which is why it's in the list. And it's more in the list for that ability over the fact that it is a vampire. I think if this creature was any other creature type other than vampire, it would still be put in this list just because of its ability. There's Dictative Erebos that does this the same thing, and then there's Grave Pact, which also does the same thing. Grave Pact is 4 mana. Dictative Erebos is 5 mana. Grave Pact is specifically 1 generic black, and it's an enchantment. Dictative Erebos is also an enchantment, but it is 3 black, but it has flash. Dictative Erebos has flash. All 3 of these things essentially do the same effect, with the exception of Butcher of Malakir, who is a creature and counts himself for the ability. The other 2 cards that I just mentioned are enchantments and just care about creatures you control dying. So Butcher of Malakir gives you 1 extra thing that's going to force your opponents to sacrifice stuff if it goes away, which is itself. Whereas the 2 enchantments are like, we only care about creatures, we're enchantments, so if we go away, we just go away. Nothing else happens. But again, as I said, I think Butcher would still be in this list. I think Butcher would be in a lot of lists, even if it's not a vampire. Just because of its ability, especially all the decks that are playing like the aristocrat style stuff. Butcher just is an extra aristocrat trigger, not necessarily an outlet, but a trigger when you start doing aristocrat stuff, which is not fun, but I feel he's evenly costed. He's 7 mana, has flying, is a 5/4 with that ability. I think that's fair. I think everything about this guy is fair. Next card is Olivia Crimson Bride, which is 4 generic, red and black. It's a legendary creature, vampire noble. It has flying and haste, and it's a 3/4. 6 mana, 3/4, flying, haste. 6 mana is kind of expensive, and it's a 3/4 for 6 mana. I feel like it could be based just on those things. I feel like it's not a good card. However, it has an ability that makes it worth it at 6 mana. And that ability is, when Olivia Crimson Bride attacks, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains, when you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. So again, Olivia does have to attack, but it is a triggered ability. So if you have the throne in play and you swing with Olivia, you're going to get 2 creatures back into play, tapped and attacking. Now, granted, those creatures do say, as long as you don't control, as soon as you don't control a legendary vampire, you have to exile this creature. Well, you're in Mardu, so there's a lot of legendary vampires you can play in. There's several that you can play in black that are legendary. There's some in white that you can play that are legendary. There's some in red that you can play that are legendary. But there's also quite a few that you could play that's in the full range of Mardu that are also legendary. That are some of your alternate commanders that we'll get to, hopefully at the end of this video, that I'll talk about. They didn't necessarily make it into the list, but you can definitely build around them and do like vampire tribal stuff with them. So the next card is Carmen, Cruel Sky Marcher. It's 3 generic, white, black for a 2/2. That's just on those stats. That's a little bit of an overpriced 2/2 and not what I would normally consider, but it made it in the list because of the abilities. So the abilities are, it has flying, so it has evasion. And whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, any kind of permanent, they crack a fetch land while this is in play, you're going to get this. They crack a treasure token, they crack a clue, they crack a food, they sacrifice a creature for something. As long as they are sacrificing a permanent to do an effect, you're going to get this benefit, which is you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Cruel Sky Marcher, and you gain a life. So the Sky Marcher gets bigger, and you gain a life in the process. So that already made it good enough, in my opinion, to put it in as part of the vampire. It's also a vampire soldier. It's part of your vampire tribal theme, even though it's a 5-mana 2/2 with flying. And if you have the Butcher Malakir in play, you can force your opponents to sacrifice creatures, which are a permanent. Whenever Karman attacks, return up to one target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to Karman's power, not necessarily base power, but Karman's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, first off, she cares about your opponent sacrificing permanents, which you can kind of force them to do with some of the stuff that we have in the deck. Not very often, but you can force that to happen, so she can grow in size. She has flying, which is evasion. And whenever she attacks, so first off, the 1/1 counter and life gain, that's a triggered ability. So with the throne, you're going to get double triggers. And then the other thing is, whenever she attacks, you get to reanimate a permanent, any permanent, from your graveyard to the battlefield that has a mana value equal to or less than her power, equal to or less than Karman's power. That's also a trigger. So with the throne, you're going to get a double trigger there. So Karman has 2 relevant abilities that are both triggered abilities that the throne will give you double triggers on, to make her bigger, give you some life, and let you reanimate some stuff whenever she attacks. So I feel like all of that combined makes her relevant enough and warranted enough to put in the list. And I think she's fairly cheap. I'm not positive, but I think she's fairly cheap. So that was another factor. Next card is Null Priest of Oblivion. It's 1 generic and a black for a vampire cleric. It's a 2/1. 2 mana, 2/1. Standard, sure. Has Menace and Lifelink, so it's going to gain you life whenever it deals damage, and it's harder to block because they have to block with 2 or more creatures. Has Kicker. Kicker is 3 generic and a black. The reason we're playing this is for the Kicker, for no other reason. And it states, when Null Priest of Oblivion enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So for a generic and a black, it's a 2/1 with Menace and Lifelink that, because of Edgar, is going to generate you an extra creature token. If you cast it for Kicker, which is what you're planning on doing, is casting it for Kicker, the additional Kicker ability makes it 4 generic black for a 2/1 with Menace and Lifelink that is also going to give you a creature token whenever you cast it, but then whenever it comes into play, you get to reanimate a creature from your graveyard straight onto the battlefield. Crossway Troublemakers. This one is in here strictly for its abilities, even though it's a 6 mana 5/5. It's 5 generic and a black for a vampire. It's a 5/5 relevant on par. It's like a common, I think, or uncommon. It says attacking vampires you control have Death Touch and Lifelink. So if you have this in play, you don't need the Vault of the Archangel on your turn. You can still use the Vault of the Archangel, but you might leave mana up for that on somebody else's turn. Also says, whenever a vampire you control dies, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. So, attacking vampires you control have Death Touch and Lifelink, so they're all going to gain you life when they deal damage, and they're probably going to kill things that block them, if not trade with them. The other thing is, anytime a vampire you control dies, you can pay 2 life, and if you do, you get to draw a card. So it gives you card draw. Again, you're losing life, but it gives all your guys lifelink. That secondary effect of whenever one of them dies, you can pay 2 life to draw a card. That's a triggered ability. So again, with the throne, if a vampire creature you control dies, you get the ability to pay 2 life, and if you do, you draw a card, and that happens twice per a creature dying on your side. And that could happen at any time. It doesn't have to happen during your turn. You get the ability when the creature dies, so you can't like, I have this thing and then hold it onto the stack and wait to see what else happens. You get the option to do this when the creature dies, but it doesn't say when a creature dies during your turn. It just says whenever a vampire you control dies, you get this effect. Dusk Legion Zealot is literally in here for its ability. That's pretty much it, and the fact that it's a vampire. It's a 1 generic, 1 black, 1/1. It's a vampire soldier, so whenever you cast it, you're going to get that token. But it also states when it comes into play, you lose a life and you draw a card. So it gives you loss of life and draw a card. It is a vampire, so if the game went a little bit later, and you have the Throne in play, that is technically a triggered ability when it comes in, so you would lose 2 life, draw 2 cards. Falkenrath Noble is just a more expensive version of Blood Artist. Instead of 1 generic and a black for a 0/1, it's 3 generic and a black for a 2/2 with flying, but it does the same thing as Blood Artist. Whenever a creature dies, target player loses a life. Whenever a creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain a life. Bloodline Necromancer is 4 generic and a black for a 3/2 with lifelink. It is a vampire wizard. This one's a little unique. You don't see a lot of vampire wizards. But this one's fun because this one you could use in 2 tribal decks, vampires or wizards, because of its ability. And it says, when Bloodline Necromancer enters the battlefield, you may return target vampire or wizard creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's a 5-mana creature with lifelink that when it comes into play, you get to reanimate a vampire or a wizard from your graveyard straight into play. So with the Throne, if you have the Throne creature in play, then you play this, you get to reanimate 2 things for 5 mana, so it's also good. If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of things in here that have triggered abilities that want the Throne creature to be in play first so that you can get extra triggers, which is mostly what I tried to base around the budget list from. If I went for a more expensive list, the mana base would be different, and it would be far more like aristocrat style stuff. It would be like, this creature comes in, everybody's going to do something. I'm going to get a benefit, everybody's going to get some kind of negative effect or something like that. Like it'd be a lot more aristocrat stuff. I would still play Edgar Markov as the commander because it gives you extra creatures to use for your aristocrat abilities. But it would be far more aristocrat than like play creatures, turn them sideways, do things. Dusk Legion Sergeant is 1 generic and a black. It's a vampire soldier. It's a 2/2. I feel like this is a good creature, period. But it's in here because of the ability. This is not something you would play in a non-vampire deck. You would not play this in a deck that's like only soldiers or, just a generic black deck. You're only going to play this in a vampire deck, but it's good. So it's 1 generic and a black for a 2/2 vampire soldier. It has menace, so they have to block with 2 or more creatures. 1 generic and a black. Sacrifice Dusk Legion Sergeant, so you don't have to tap it. It can be tapped and you can activate this ability. You don't have to tap it to use this ability. Each non-token vampire creature you control gains persist until end of turn. Now that's relevant because each creature that has a persist ability on it states when this creature dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, you return it to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. So this, like if somebody goes to play a board wipe and you're going to hit all of your creatures, like it's going to get rid of all your creatures, you can spend the 2 mana to sacrifice this guy and give all of your other non-token vampires persist until end of turn, which means after the board wipe happens, they're going to come back. And anything that's not a 1 toughness creature normally is going to get to live. Anything that is a 1 toughness creature comes back with that -1/-1 counter. You get its enter the battlefield trigger, but it dies before that trigger resolves. So you'll still get the trigger, but it'll still technically end up dead. But anything that's got a toughness greater than 1 is going to get to stick around. So that's always nice and fun. Alinda's Hierophant, which is 2 generic and a white. It's a vampire cleric. It's a 1/1. It has flying. Whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on Alinda's Hierophant. That goes back to what I was saying earlier in video 1, where you had the one vampire that says whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. And then if you have the throne, it doubles the trigger. Well, if you have both and you swing with 4, it puts 8 triggers of life gain, life loss, life gain on the stack instead of 4, and just doubles the value. So that'll be 8 triggers for Alinda's Hierophant. So she would effectively get 8 counters. She also states whenever she dies, you make X 1/1 vampire, white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is her power. So again, whenever she dies, her power is going to give you tokens, just like Alinda the Dusk Rose. And then that's also, that's the other thing. Her life gain ability is a triggered ability. Her death ability is also a triggered ability. So if you have the throne, both her abilities are going to trigger twice every time they would trigger if you have the throne creature in play. So she'll effectively get double counters, and she'll make you double tokens. Order of Sacred Dusk. 6 generic white-black. It's another creature with Convoke for vampires. I think there's 2 in total in here. They're both relevant. I feel like this one's extremely relevant, personally. So it's 6 white-black, 6 generic white-black for 5/5. Vampire Knight. So it's 8 mana, but it has Convoke, so you can make it a whole lot cheaper because of all the tokens. Has 3 relevant keyword abilities: Flying, Lifelink, and Haste. Those are super good abilities. Has an additional keyword ability that you don't see that often. It's called Exalted, which states whenever a creature attacks alone, for every instance of Exalted that you have on your side of the board, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it itself has Exalted in addition to the Flying, Lifelink, and Haste. So based on that, it's an 8 mana creature that is a 5/5 that has Convoke. So you can use creatures you have in play already to cast it or help cast it. It has Flying, which is evasion, Haste, which lets it swing immediately, and Lifelink, so you're going to gain life. It also has Exalted, so whenever it swings alone, it's going to get +1/+1, and it's effectively a 6/6. The last ability is probably where its power is. So first off, even though it's an 8 mana 5/5, every other effect it's had is basically making it a stronger creature. Its very last ability is where it's, for DBZ references, I guess, its very last ability is where basically if you're wearing a Scouter, it's like its power's over 9,000, which is other vampires you control have Exalted. So let's say you have 8 vampire creatures in play with a mixture of red, white, and black pips in them that all have Summoning Sickness. Well, you can tap all 8 of them and play this creature. This creature has Haste, so it can swing the same turn. It itself has Exalted, and it gives those 8 other creatures Exalted. So not only was this guy free, essentially, you can swing with it the same turn it comes in, and if you do, it's going to get +9/+9, because you used the 8 other creatures you had that you used to play it plus itself. So it's a 14/14, and you're going to gain 14 life if it deals damage. So it's just, its power's over 9,000. Like, that's all I can really say. The next card is Dark Imposter. It's 2 generic and a black for a 2/2. It's a vampire assassin. You don't see a ton of vampire assassins. Most of the vampires in this list, I think, are either vampire warriors, vampire knights, or vampire shamans. There's, I think, 1 or 2 wizards. I think this is the only assassin. Granted, they're all vampires, but it's mostly in your knights, warriors, and shamans. So this guy says for 4 generic, black, exile target creature and put a +1/+1 counter on Dark Imposter. So this guy's in the list because it's an on-board removal option. You can just for 6 mana, you can just flat exile a creature that's a problem. And this guy gets bigger. That's an activated ability, so you're not going to get double triggers with it. But it has something else. Dark Imposter has all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with it. So whenever you exile a creature with it, if that creature has any activated abilities, Dark Imposter gains those activated abilities. But it's also an onboard stick that sits there and says, if I have the mana, I'm going to exile the biggest problem creature. And I'm going to get a little bit bigger. bear with me, guys. We're close to the end. So the last creature in the list. Hello. I literally just got your phone call. Oh, Facebook. Yeah. Okay. So Messenger's not going to notify me of a phone call unless I have the Facebook Messenger app open, and I usually don't keep it open. Yeah. In the process of making a video. Why? What's up? No. What's up? And so no, hold on. After I get done with the video, I don't really have much of anything that's going on. So after that, I'm free. Okay. Okay. No. This is 4, 5. This is either video 5 or 6 or 7. I have sent you links. Did I not send you the other ones? I thought I sent you the other ones. Well, there's. Hey, I'm still here. So there's five. There's currently 5 videos on the playlist. I'm in the process of uploading number 6 and recording number 7 because I had some technical issues. Okay, well, I mean that means there's several videos for you to watch then. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. that sounds good.
Let's see how that goes. Because I feel like those are both just big baddies. And we'll see kind of what happens. All right, I'll talk to you later.
All right, man.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
I apologize for that, everybody. That took a little bit longer, but we are almost done with the deck. We're going to blaze through these things. Immersturm Predator. It's 2 generic red-black for a 3/3 Vampire Dragon. Vampire Dragon, relevant. Has flying. Whenever it becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on Immersturm Predator. So, whenever it becomes tapped, usually from attacking, you get to exile any card you want from a graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's also Sacrifice Outlet. Sacrifice another creature. Immersturm Predator gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. So if somebody's going to play, if it's untapped, somebody's going to play board wipe. Not only do you make it indestructible, in the process you can make it bigger because you'll force it to tap and exile something, and then you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So we're finally done with the creatures. Again, this is mostly creature based. So next up is your instant sorceries. Utility cards, removal cards, whatever you want to call them. Path to Exile. Path to Exile is explanatory. It's 1 white, exile a creature, they get to go get a basic land. Swords to Plowshares. 1 white, exile a creature, they gain life equal to its toughness. Boros Charm. Boros Charm has 3 different options. It's a red and white, and it's an instant. You can either deal 4 damage to target player or planeswalker, or you can have permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn, or target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Most notably, all 3 options are semi-relevant. When this card was played in the standard format, the 4 damage to a player or planeswalker was the most relevant of them. Giving target creature double strike until end of turn can kind of let you play politics a little bit because you could give it to any creature in play. But the most notably, most used ability is permanent you control gain indestructible until end of turn for 2 mana, which is why it's an include in this list. The next card is And They Shall Know No Fear. It's 1 generic and a white. Choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1 power and gain indestructible until end of turn. So it's an instant. You can protect your board for 2 mana and give them a little boost. If somebody's like trying to attack in and then like kill things, you can be like, cool, my board's got, indestructible and they're slightly bigger, so we can still potentially kill some of your stuff. Akroma's Will. 3 generic and a white. It's an instant. You get to choose one of the following abilities. If you control your commander, however, you get to do both. The abilities are creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn. That's all part of one section. And then the second option is creatures you control gain lifelink and indestructible and protection from all colors until end of turn. That's the other thing. Again, if you control your commander, whenever you cast this, you get both. All creatures you control get flying, vigilance, double strike, lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn whenever you cast this. Utter End. I'm playing Utter End instead of Anguished Unmaking. It's 1 more to do it, but you don't lose 3 life in the process. There's enough stuff in the deck as is that either force you to lose life to do an ability, want you to pay life to do an ability, whatever the case is, and you're not always guaranteed to have anything that gains you life happening. So Utter End is 2 generic, a white and a black, exile target non-land permanent. You can hit planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, creatures. You can hit anything in play as long as it's a permanent in play that isn't a land, which is relevant. The one true board wipe you play in the deck is Ruinous Ultimatum. It's red, red, white, 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 black, black. Sorcery. Destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. You can play more board wipes, and your commander makes it so that whenever you cast creature spells, you get more creature tokens. But since we're going for a more budget list, I wanted to cut down on the number of board wipes you play and predominantly, make it so that your deck is more about if an opponent plays a board wipe, you can rebuild a little bit faster, and cut back on the removal and the board wipe options. The board wipe you do play hits everything except for lands your opponents control. All planeswalkers, all artifacts, all enchantments, all creatures, as long as none of it's lands. Those things are going to go bye-bye. Apart from your mana rocks in the deck, the only other artifacts that we play in this list is Vanquisher's Banner, which is a 5 generic artifact. When it comes into play, you choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1, so it's a 5 mana Lord ability that affects all of your creatures in play of that type. It also says whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, you get to draw a card. So it's another card draw option that can help you out. Like if you're running low on cards in hand and you've got this in play, you cast a vampire, you draw a card. So it's relevant. Herald's Horn, you're also playing this, again, for its static abilities. It's 3 generic. When it comes into play, you name a creature type. Creature spells you control of the chosen type cost 1 generic less to cast, so it makes them all cheaper. It also says at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature that shares a type with the type that you chose, you can reveal it and add it to your hand, so it potentially helps dig you out of a hole of not having cards. You could be like, oh, play this. I've got 3 cards in hand, but they're lands. You go to your turn, you reveal a vampire, you get to add that to your hand, and then you get to draw another card, and, if that's another vampire, you've got 2 creatures to play on top of your land drop. Your 1 mass recursion card in the deck is Living Death. So the reason we play Living Death over things like Patriarch's Bidding, Twilight's Call, and stuff of that nature is Living Death has the added benefit, like in addition to you reanimating your graveyard and everybody else reanimating your graveyard, the added benefit is you force every creature that's already in play to be sacrificed. So if somebody's like, I have a board of indestructible creatures that are a problem, and like maybe 1 or 2 creatures in my graveyard, the Living Death is going to force their indestructible board state of creatures to go away, and their non-indestructible board state of creatures that are currently in their graveyard to come back into play. So that's why we play Living Death. And it's a sorcery. Shared Animosity. A lot of aggressive decks that play red run Shared Animosity. I think this is the only... I think there's 1 or 2 or 3, maybe. There might be 5 solid red things in total in the deck, and this is one of them. And it's 2 generic and a red for an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control attacks, put a +1/+0... Or whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. So this is the counter-active ability of the creature that gives them all Exalted. This says you want to attack with all of them. So I've included both cards because one card is going to say, if I have a wide board state, now my wide board state is also huge on the front end and is going to punch really hard. Whereas the other one says, if I have a wide board state, but I don't have favorable attacks, I can leave most of my board state back to block and swing with one creature, and that one creature grows really huge and becomes a problem for that combat. Also, Exalted is a triggered ability based on you going to combat. So for every vampire you have that has... Wow, just now thought about that. So the Throne creature that says whenever a triggered ability of a vampire you control trigger, you get an additional trigger. Well, the Exalted ability is a triggered ability, and the guy that has Exalted gives an instance of Exalted to every vampire you control other than himself because he already has it. So if you have the Throne, him, and 6 other creatures in play that are vampires, and you swing with one of them, you're going to get 6, 7, 8. That's 8. That creature's going to get 14 triggers of Exalted, because all your vampires are going to get 2 triggers on their Exalted triggers because of the Throne. So like if you swing with that guy, he's a base 5/5, he's going to get +16/+16. He'll be a 21/21 flying lifelink haste. So that'll be hugely relevant. So that's kind of dumb. Shared Animosity is also a triggered ability, but it's not on creatures you control. It is strictly the enchantment that is doing it. So I don't know, that might be a toss-up. Enchantments are a little bit harder to deal with if you're not playing green or white. If you're playing any color other than green or white, enchantments are hard for you to deal with. But if you're playing creatures, regardless of what color you are, creatures are relatively easy to deal with. So like the trade-off there is you don't get extra triggers from the Shared Animosity because it's just an enchantment. It's not a vampire. But the other vampire card that is a creature that gives the bonuses and stuff, you'll get extra triggers off that, but it's easier to deal with because it's a creature. And the last two cards, the first of the last two cards is Phyrexian Arena. During your upkeep, you draw a card, you lose a life. It's extra card draw. It's another loss of life thing. You're hard up on drawing cards in this color combination, so you kind of need some of those utility things that do that. And the very last card in the list is Black Market Connections. Phyrexian Arena is 1 generic black for an enchantment. Black Market Connections is 2 generic and a black that says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, choose one or more. The first is you can make a treasure token, but you lose a life. The second is you can draw a card, but you lose 2 life. And the third is you make a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling, meaning it has all creature types, and you lose 3 life. So if you do all those abilities on each of your upkeeps with just the Black Market Connections, you're losing 6 life per upkeep, but you're getting an extra mana, an extra card, and an extra creature. And the creature's a vampire, so it gets buffed from all your vampire buffs. So again, these very last two cards, they're both enchantments, they're both in black. They both force you to lose life for doing the abilities, one of which you have to do, like the Phyrexian Arena. You don't have a choice. You have to draw that card. As long as you have the ability to draw cards, you have to draw that card and you have to lose the life. If for some reason you can't draw cards, or like if Marilyn the Mornsong's in play, like you just aren't allowed to draw cards, you still lose the life. Black Market Connections, the ability happens at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, and it's choose one or more. So you can choose. You could effectively choose. What is it? I think you have to choose one, but you don't have to choose more than one. So you could just always choose treasure, and you lose 1 life, and you make an extra mana source for the turn. Like if you were really, really hurting on life, I think like that's the limit. It also happens during your pre-combat, at the start of your pre-combat main phase. So if you have a way, if for some reason somebody has a way to get rid of it before the start of your pre-combat main phase, maybe because they don't want you to get the creature or the card draw, you don't have to worry about the loss of life. Whereas like the start of the upkeep for the Phyrexian Arena, at the start of the upkeep, the Phyrexian Arena ability goes on the stack. Even if they get rid of the arena, you're still going to have that trigger to deal with. So that's kind of the trade-off there. I'm going to try and finish this video up really quickly if possible. Give me just a second, guys. So some of the other cards that you could use in the deck that I didn't put in the list is War Leader's Call. It's a new Boros enchantment that gives all creatures you control +1/+1, but it also has the added benefit of like an impact tremors. Whenever a creature comes to play under your control, each opponent takes a damage. And it's only 3 mana. You could probably put this in place of the Shared Animosity if you wanted to, because it gives a +1/+1 instead of +1/+0. It's a static +1/+1, so it's there as long as the enchantment's in play and not based on creatures attacking. Another card you could put in is Vein Ripper, which is a 6 mana vampire assassin. It's a 6/5 for 3 generic black that says it has ward, which is the ward cost is sacrifice a creature. So if your opponent targets it with a spell or ability, that spell or ability gets countered unless they sacrifice a creature. And the other ability is whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So fun fact, ward is also a triggered ability. So if you have the Roaming Throne in play and the Vein Ripper and they try to target the Vein Ripper, they now have to pay the ward cost twice, which is another thing you won't see too often. But the other thing is, whenever a creature, it says whenever a creature dies, it doesn't care what creature, whenever a creature dies, target opponent, so it's targeted, not each, loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So that's not, it's a 6 mana 6/5 that's highly relevant. No, that's not where I wanted to go. Okay. Actually, I think it'd probably be faster if I just do this. That's a lie. There we go. Okay. So some of the other legendary vampires that I was trying to talk about earlier that didn't make it into the list that would be really good, depending on what you do, is So the Strafen guy, if you were doing red-black, is Strafen Marer Progenitor. Has flying at the beginning of your end step. You make a number of blood tokens for each player who lost life this turn. That includes yourself. He's a 3/2 for 4 with flying. He also states whenever he attacks, you may sacrifice 2 blood tokens. If you do, you get to put any vampire from your hand into play, tapped and attacking, and that vampire gains indestructible until end of turn. So that vampire gets to stick around. He's one if you're doing like predominantly red-black. He's good. One of the ones I did not include is Olivia Voldaren, which is the original Olivia, if I remember correctly. It's a 4 mana 3/3 with flying. For 1 generic and a red, you can deal 1 damage to any creature in play, put a +1/+1 counter on Olivia Voldaren, and the creature that you deal damage to becomes a vampire. While it's in play, it's a vampire. And then for 3 generic and a black, you can gain control of a vampire for as long as you control Olivia Voldaren. She's another fairly decent legendary vampire creature for that legendary vampire that's in the deck that reanimates things. Another one I didn't include in the list that I really wanted to try and find a slot in the list, mainly because it's an 8 mana creature, is Liella Sanguine Tribune. She costs 1 generic less to cast for each 1 life you gain this turn, so she can make herself cheaper if you can consistently gain life. She has first strike and lifelink, and she's a 4/4 for 5 generic red, white, and black. Once she's in play, you can pay 5 life to put 3 +1/+1 counters on her, but you can only activate the ability on your turn. So you can only do it on your turn, and you can only do it once on your turn, on each of your turns. So you can only do it once per rotation, essentially. But 5 life for 3 +1/+1 counters is pretty good. It is an activated ability, not a triggered ability, so the Roaming Throne's not gonna do the giving you extra counters stuff. But she does have first strike and lifelink. She's another Mardu-colored legendary vampire that you could play as an alternative to Edgar, but doesn't give you the extra creatures. So your deck would probably be more focused on the life gain aspect in order to consistently make her just 3 mana as often as possible. Astarion the Decadent didn't make it into the list. He's got relevant abilities. He's got Death Touch. He's got Lifelink. He's a 4/4 for 6. And he's got 2 abilities that trigger at your end step. At the beginning of your end step, you can choose one of the 2 abilities, and the abilities are target opponent who lost life this turn loses that much life again, or you can gain an amount of life this turn equal to the amount of life you've already gained. So those are triggered abilities. So with the Roaming Throne, let's say an opponent lost 5 life, well, now you can force them to lose another 5 life, and then with if the Roaming Throne's in play, you can force them to lose more, but now the 5 on the 5 is 10, so you can force them to lose an additional 10. So say they lose 5 life from combat damage, and then your end step happens. Now you can force them to lose 5 from the triggered ability on Astarion, and then with the Roaming Throne, you can force them to lose another 10 life on top of that, because the total now comes to 10. So if they started at 40, they're now at 20. Same process. If somehow you gained 5 life, Astarion's going to say you gain 5 life again, and then the Roaming Throne's going to say, now that your total's up to 20, if you choose this again, or the total's up to 10. If you choose this, you'll gain 10 life. So you gain 5 life from an effect. Astarion's going to gain you 5, and then Astarion's going to gain you an additional 10. So you'll have gained 20 life over the course of the turn. Those were really the big ones. There's Edgar Charmed Groom that you could put in the list. I don't know that you would want to play it as the commander. Oh, that's the other thing. So Lelia's in your Mardu colors. Strafen's in your Rakdos colors. And Olivia Voldaren's in your Rakdos colors. And Astarion's in your Orzhov colors, which is white-black. Those were the big cards that I wanted to find slots in the deck, that I felt like I couldn't find without taking away a removal piece or a reanimation piece or something of that nature and putting them in. The other thing that I could do is I could probably fit one of these in the deck and just take out the Roaming Throne. Too many things. I feel like too many things in the deck have good relevant triggered abilities that want you to hit that want you to have the roaming throne in play. So once the roaming throne comes down, if you just target that, those creatures are not as strong. But those are other possible options that I personally would recommend, just because I've seen some of those be really dumb. But again, I'll leave a link. I'll leave a link either in the description box or as a comment in part 1, and in the description box or as a comment in part 2 in this video. With that, we're pretty much done. Again, if you like the video, hit the thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of February. If we can do that, I will look into setting up a Patreon and maybe setting up something so that Patreons get videos 2 or 3 days early or something like that. Just to give me more capable time of handling things, hopefully. As well as maybe some benefits. If we can hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of February, I will try to get a Discord server set up so that people can start, talking to each other, doing deck ideas and everything on the Discord server. That'll probably be something that's connected to the Patreon. Also, if you're going to subscribe, please hit the notification bell so that you can be notified whenever new content pops up. As of right now, I'm currently just making these videos as ideas pop in my head or suggestions are made, whichever comes first. I have a lot of ideas I want to do. The thing is I have so many ideas, I just get flustered with which one do I do next. And so I'm actually more paying attention to the comments on the videos. So if somebody makes a comment and I'm like, oh, that was a nifty idea, let me, talk about this or discuss this or something of that nature. It's very likely that I'm more likely to do a video talking about someone's comment on a previous video before following through with another idea that I have. And sometimes some of my ideas are very broad. Like, I want to do videos that, like, I make a deck list, I explain the cards in the list, why they're there, some of your alternative options and things of that nature. But on top of that, like, that's a very broad thing. Like, deck lists, hundreds of thousands of them that could be done. So like, people who are commenting like, oh, this is a specific deck list type idea that I want to look at. Tribals are a little bit more fun because it narrows what you can play, but it doesn't necessarily limit your colors. Like the person that commented about vampires, they specifically wanted to know about mono black or red black vampires, and I've just now spent 2 videos discussing a red white black vampire deck list. So the limitation was vampires. They were more specific into what color combination they wanted. I branched out from that a little bit. But like, again, tribal typo options don't necessarily limit your colors, especially since they're starting to do more cards in multiple tribes across various colors. So again, I'm probably more going to pay attention to comments, at least for the foreseeable future, for like the next couple of months, while I try to talk to people about getting like the Facebook page finalized. It's technically up. It technically works. There is a link to a website, but the website link doesn't work. So as soon as like we can get the website link done up, we're going to talk to some people about a couple of things. Try and get in touch with the other people that originally helped start the Cardboard Kitchen podcast group, which I was one of the original members. But there were 3 others. Talk to 1 or 2 of those guys. I think one of those guys has something to do with some of the online stuff. But talk to one of those guys about setting up some more stuff, finalizing some stuff, all that nature. But again, if you like the content and you want to help us out, the best way to help us out right now is to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell, and, make a comment. If you see something in a video and you want to make a comment like, I think you did this poorly, maybe you could do this instead, I'm all for that. Constructive criticism is welcome. I would prefer to leave comments on and allow people who have constructive criticism to make those comments, rather than turn comments off and not deal with people who are just going to badmouth or bash or whatever the case is. Because I know I watch YouTube videos where people comment and they only have negative things to say about the person in the video or the people in the video or the video itself. So I'd prefer to not see those comments, but those are probably going to pop up as time progresses. But I would rather leave comments turned on so that I can potentially interact and make videos for the community as the community requests them. Again, the biggest thing you can do to help right now is subscribe. Once we get some other things set up, I'll try to get on a more regular basis of when I record the videos and get them put out and all that fun stuff. But for right now, it's make the videos as soon as I have the idea and the free time. So when both of those criterias are met, I literally hop down here to my little recording space that I also need to try and schedule some time to come down here and clean out some extra, like move stuff around so I can change couple of things. I've got like, you can see I want that to be in a more clear shot, obviously, but like I've got some magic artwork stuff that I want to go on the wall behind me that's a little difficult to do right now because of the way the angles are. So I've got I've got to set aside some time to schedule to clean up some of this stuff here. But again, comment, subscribe, like, thumbs up the video, hit the notification bell, leave a comment on thoughts, ideas, constructive criticism, whatever the case is. If you want me to go over like a deck recipe of some kind, I call them deck recipes and not necessarily deck lists because this is Cardboard Kitchen, and your deck list, which is effectively a recipe that you would follow, can work in several different ways. So, if you want me to cover a deck recipe idea, I say idea because I would prefer you not leave an entire list in the comments. Just because right now, with the exception of posting a comment or reaching out through the Facebook page, those are the only ways that you would really have to get in touch with me. If you can just kind of like give me a general idea and maybe a commander option to like help limit stuff, I can dig into like a deck list in my free time, figure out like the things that I would want to play. I will probably talk about a budget-friendly option versus a like homed option that's not budget-friendly. Just because this podcast was originally intended for people of all backgrounds, whether they've recently started playing or they've been playing for 20 plus years like I have, to be able to get in the game. So budget-friendly lists are more apt to allow people to come in and enjoy the content. If they want to build something from one of these lists, it's more apt for them to come in and enjoy the content and kind of like play around with some of the ideas that I have on this channel, or at least for this podcast. But yeah, I'm also working on stuff in the background, so. Last reiteration, if you like it, hit that thumbs up. If you're going to be coming back for more and you're not currently subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell button so you can be notified. And the reason I say that is I was looking at the stuff today. There's 2/3 of the people watching these videos that aren't subscribed. If you're watching these videos and then you keep coming back to watch these videos, because you're comparing things that I'm saying to other content creators, it doesn't hurt you to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It really doesn't hurt you. If anything, it helps the channel. And as the channel grows, I do my best to try and grow with it. So really looking forward to seeing you guys, hit that 1,000 subscriber mark by the end of February. I know it can be done. I've seen you guys do it on other channels. Let's get it done and do it on this channel. Bring hopefully some extra spicy content for you guys in the future. Thanks, and have a nice day.